Hello, and welcome to Speak Up for Our Planet. All the recordings you find on this channel are of specific environmental topics. The speakers illustrate and explain their subject and are open to questions from the audience. If you'd like to join us live, please visit our website and click Join Us. Hope to see you soon.
Okay, well, I'm delighted to welcome Paul Hallas, our speaker tonight. I can tell you all about Paul, and he's basically been in the energy sector. That is his working life, more than 4 decades. I think it's very brave to admit to, but I have to admit that I met him in the first of those decades. So he actually was
That's brave.
he was my boss for one or two projects. So I have to be very good to Paul for that, or ever since. But I think really when he really found his stride up, from what I know, is when he joined Centrica, and he had a lot of roles in Centrica, really central to the growth of the gas business in Centrica. He's also on the advisory board of IRT Service, and they're a provider of energy efficiency services to the social housing sector. So quite a nice balance between the central making of money and the social housing sector. He is now an NED with Manchester Energy Network and a council-owned district energy business, as well as a retail energy code company. He's a volunteer for Sustainable Energy 24, which delivers community energy projects in London. And he's a board member of Community Energy London. He delivers training courses on traded wholesale energy markets and advises on 3 energy sector startups. So he's still very much involved in the energy sector. And I would say he's an eminence grise in the whole thing, if I've said that terribly badly for the French speakers. So I was delighted when I managed to twist Paul's arm sufficiently hard. No, when I invited Paul, would he like to talk about electricity prices? And he said yes. So I'm going to say over to Paul. He's going to talk for 20 to 25 minutes. Yeah, he's got some slides to share with us. And if you've got questions on the way, can you put them in the chat? And we will then feed the questions to him when he's given us the whole of his presentation. So, Paul, if you're ready, thank you very much.
Great, Rosie. Thank you very much for that warm and generous introduction. Very good to be with you all this evening. And I guess some people may be watching this back afterwards, so welcome to them as well. It's very good to take part in this. And as Rosie said, the exam question I was given, not always so easy to answer, but why are our electricity prices so high and what can we do about it? Well, I'm going to try and run through the main points, I say, in about 25 minutes. If I'm making no sense at all, don't hesitate to unmute and ask for clarification. Otherwise, I think questions will be held over to the back end of the evening, and I'm going to try and leave plenty of time for questions, answers, discussion, and so on. So if that's fine, let's just kind of get into that. I hope you can see the first chart, which probably tells you what you're already painfully conscious of. So I guess electricity prices, we hear about it all the time. Electricity prices in this country are quite a lot higher than they used to be. Thanks very much to the occupant of the White House. And they're also, as you can see, relatively high from a European point of view. It looks from this chart as if there's only 2 or 3 countries that have got higher prices than we do. So this kind of trend, I think, is fairly typical. This is for sort of medium households, but I mean, I think all different sizes of households are in the same position, and also it isn't that the households are sort of cross-subsidizing the industry. I think the larger non-domestic users, you hear from them from time to time. Obviously, they're facing relatively high prices as well. So the question is, why? Let's just move to the next chart. Oh, sorry, I skipped one there. Yeah, so these are just kind of rough numbers. The breakdown of the household electricity price does vary a bit over time, but I mean the big chunks are always the big chunks, and I think that as you can see from this, and no great surprise, the two most important things are the wholesale price of electricity. We'll talk quite a bit about that this evening, but also the cost of the electricity networks, which just seems to be kind of going up and up. Various reasons for that. But I mean, I think I was chatting to my son-in-law earlier this evening. We were talking about historic underinvestment in the grid. So to some extent, we're paying catch up, but also that as you know, the move towards net zero involves quite a bit of electrification of things that were previously supplied with fossil fuels. So inevitably that means that we need to kind of build out the electricity grids, and so we're seeing a kind of rising cost in that area as well. So I think those are the main points, and then we talk a little bit more now specifically about wholesale prices. Sorry, again, I've got fat fingers. So this is just a snapshot, but I think that the pattern I'm showing here is fairly typical. So the darker color means higher prices. Although you can see that the wholesale price of electricity in this country higher than it is on most of the continent, and a lot higher than it is in Scandinavia, for example. But if you sort of think that Germany is probably the benchmark European electricity market, then prices in this country, not always, but most of the time, are higher than they are in Germany, and as you can see here, quite a bit higher than they are in France. Well, there's a number of reasons for that. And maybe it's worth saying that this pattern of electricity prices is very different than the pattern of gas prices. So gas prices tend to be pretty much the same in most European countries, but the electricity is more of a kind of a national market. We are interconnected with the continent, but the level of interconnection is nowhere near enough to kind of level out the prices. So let's dig into that a little bit further. Yeah, so this just shows the generation mix in Great Britain over the course of the last, I don't know, 35 years or so. I think we all know that coal has now disappeared from the system, but we're still getting quite a chunk of our electricity from gas. I think about almost 30%. So almost 30% doesn't sound that much, but I think the key point is that we need some electricity from gas most of the time. There's not many hours in the year where we don't need any gas-fired electricity, and when we do, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But when we do, then the electricity price or the wholesale electricity price is primarily driven by the gas price. I mean, there are other factors, but I think the gas price is the most important thing. And you'll see on the left-hand side that this country, we're not unique in terms of that gas-fired generation, the importance of it. There's other countries like Italy, Ireland, the Netherlands that are in a kind of a similar position. But there's a number of other European countries that are much less dependent on fossil fuels than we are: Scandinavia, France, Iberia, among others. So that we just from this, the main takeaway from this chart is we're still quite dependent on gas-fired generation in most hours of the year. And before we go into try and explain, the pattern of pricing, just maybe worth noting what you see in this chart, which is you won't be surprised to hear electricity demand does vary quite a lot over the course of the day. So obviously there's not many of us using electricity intensively overnight. There's a bit of a peak before we go to work in the morning, and there's a bigger peak in the evening. So that is a big influence on wholesale electricity prices, and in particular, when demand is high, then we tend to need more power generation from gas, and obviously those sources have got a higher variable cost. Yeah, people. I mean, I'll try sorry, it's not very pictorial, this chart, but I'm going to try to explain. People say sometimes, why do we have a pricing system whereby the electricity price or the wholesale electricity price is driven by the marginal cost of generation? And there's been endless debate about, can we get away from that and reduce the link between electricity prices and gas prices? Frankly, easier said than done. I think that maybe one point to make here is that this pricing system is not something sort of unique or specific to the UK. It is pretty much of a norm across, well, certainly across Europe, but across many other countries as well. And I guess the fundamentals are, there can only be, I've written, I think, the second bullet point there can only be one wholesale electricity price in any particular period of time, let's say half an hour. And why do we have to pay the marginal price for the most expensive source of generation? I guess fundamentally it's a kind of supply security thing. If that marginal supply source wasn't paid for, people wouldn't make it available. And if they didn't make it available, then obviously people would struggle to balance the grid and keep it stable and maintain supply security. So I mean, I think that's the underlying rationale. But as I say, this is not unique to the UK. All the markets in Europe pretty much work the same way. And Brexit notwithstanding, we're still very much in line with the European model of how these things work. So I guess maybe the last point is important to stress as well, that in some countries, combination of renewables, nuclear, cross-border interconnection is already playing a kind of much more important role than it is in the UK. And then gas does have less influence on wholesale electricity prices. There's very little gas used in Scandinavia, just to give the most sort of extreme counterexample. But as long as gas is needed, and I think in the UK it's probably sort of 85% of the hours in the year at the moment, as long as gas is needed for most of the hours, then gas is really important influence on wholesale electricity prices. And when the gas price goes through the roof, as it did during Russia-Ukraine, and as it has done again in the Middle Eastern crisis, then electricity prices get pushed up as well. Yeah, and this is just a bit of a further deep dive into the gas side of things. So sometimes people think that gas is gas, but actually there are different types of gas-fired power generation. Historically, most of it was what we call combined cycle gas turbine plant. They were somewhat higher capital costs, but more efficient. And that worked fine when those gas plants were running most of the time. Now, of course, we've got more and more renewables on the system, so actually there aren't gas plants that are running flat out these days. Some of them run part of the time, and some of them run only very, very occasionally. So for the very occasional use, we have a different type of gas plant called the open cycle plant. Think of it as a turbine or even a gas engine. We've got those as well. So that's just the cheapest way of providing capacity, which doesn't need to run very often. So it's got lower capital costs, but it's also less efficient. So when you see in the chart above, when the when an open cycle plant, let alone a gas engine, when an open cycle plant runs, then the variable cost is quite a lot higher than it is for a traditional combined cycle plant, and obviously, the variable cost of renewables and nuclear is not very much above zero. So you can see how the more we call upon gas for our power generation, the more the electricity price, or the wholesale electricity price, is pushed up. The other thing I just want to say quickly on this chart is not to forget the cost of carbon. So that is one difference. The cost of carbon is set in emissions trading schemes. There's a UK emissions trading scheme now, which is similar to, but a bit different from the European, the EU scheme. But then the grey block at the top, the UK still has what is euphemistically called a carbon price floor, or otherwise known as a carbon tax. So that is unique to the UK, or pretty much unique. So that gas generators in the UK have to pay this tax, which there's no comparable tax in other European countries. So that could be one reason for price differences, why prices are higher in this country. You might have seen the government announced that is going to be abolished, but I think, if I remember, not until 2028. So for another couple of years, we're stuck with this thing. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Yeah, so the summary of this chart, I guess, is that variations in electricity demand across the day, combined with variations in the generation mix, cause very significant differences in wholesale electricity prices across the day. So I've deliberately chosen a day which really illustrates this point in spades. Happens to be the 4th of April 2026, but it's not a unique day. And what you can see here, I mean, I've tried to label it. We can see on the left hand side is not overnight. If it's windy, we're getting a lot of our electricity from wind farms, very low marginal cost, and often if it is windy overnight, the wholesale price can be pretty low. Then the morning peak here, obviously a lot of gas generation was needed, and the price was 5 or 6 times as high. And then on this particular day, it must have been very sunny. Sometimes it is, of course, in this country, and the high level of solar generation really pushed the prices down. You can see the wholesale price actually went down to zero on this day for a few hours, and then rose again in the evening peak. So this is just to illustrate the fundamental point of just how important it is as to what the generation mix is at any particular time, and how that is probably the key driver of the level of wholesale electricity prices. And as you can see, they do vary quite a lot. And I'm just going to slightly change tack here. So obviously we've got, as we moving towards, the target of a low carbon electricity grid, officially 90% by 2030, and we might miss it, but we're actually moving. The UK is moving towards that goal. Might miss it by a few years, but definitely the move is in that direction. So as we've got more renewables, I mean, there's an opportunity to reduce our dependence on gas-fired power generation. So traditionally, the electricity system in this country relied primarily on thermal generation, coal and gas, for all the flexibility that the system operator needed to balance the system. Now, of course, the renewable generation is driven mainly by the weather, whether it's windy or whether it's sunny. and so generation is becoming less and less flexible. So we need flexibility from other places. In the medium term, I'm not quite sure what I mean by that, but certainly in this decade, a lot of that flexibility is coming from um, energy storage, mainly batteries. And you can see here how the amount of battery storage capacity on the system has just grown exponentially in the last 5, 6, 7 years, and that's probably not going to stop. So batteries are getting more and more important. Um, the second point on the chart might surprise you a bit, but we're also getting flexibility out of the interconnectors. So I mean, just imagine that if it's very windy in the UK, then we may actually be exporters of electricity overnight, and then later on in the day, if continental generation is available at a lower cost than gas generation in this country, then most likely the interconnectors will be importing. The UK is on average a net importer of electricity, but I'm just showing that the flows on the interconnectors can be a provider of flexibility as well as a provider of lower cost, lower carbon electricity supply. And then the third point on this chart, which is still in its infancy, I'll probably show you that in a minute, but I think everybody can see that that consumer flexibility is going to be required. In other words, battery storage either isn't going to be enough on its own, or it's not the least cost solution. And all the projections say that consumers will be a more and more important provider of flexibility as time goes on. And I think most of that is probably going to come from electric vehicles or from the batteries in electric vehicles. I don't know about you. I get emails from my electricity supplier from time to time saying, "Can you use a bit more electricity in this hour, and we'll pay you tuppence halfpenny, or a bit less electricity in that other hour, and we'll pay you a fraction of a tuppence halfpenny." That might make a bit of difference, but it's not very. It's quantitatively, it's not enough, and I think everybody seems to think that as the number of electric vehicles just keeps going up and up, then that is going to be an important source of flexibility to the grid in the future. In other words, when we don't need our electric vehicles, we'll effectively lend that battery storage. Yeah, we get paid for it, but we'll lend that battery storage to the grid and help to support the grid. That's the idea. So this is just a kind of a personal example from my own experience. So this whole idea of consumer flexibility, it's in its infancy still. Not just here. I think in most countries it's in its infancy, but suppliers are offering more and more kind of incentive for people who are interested to get involved in this. So I think everybody sort of thinks that, and it's probably true, that Octopus are the people who are in the lead, but they're not the only ones. I mean, my supplier is Xeon, and they're trying to do the same thing. So I recently, bought a little battery to sit alongside the few solar panels I have on the roof out here. And at the same time, I moved myself onto a different tariff with E.ON. So in countries like France, everybody takes this time of use tariff thing for granted. It's existed for decades, but is relatively new in Britain. So you just I mean, this is just an example, but you can see what happens here. So my supplier says if I want to buy electricity overnight, it's very cheap. If I buy it, most of the time during the day, it's kind of a medium price, certainly well below the current price cap. But on the other hand, if I'm buying electricity at the peak time in the evening, between 4 and 7 in the evening, then my electricity is more expensive. So obviously, I'm trying to avoid that. So one of the things I'm using the battery to do is try and buy as much electricity as I can at the cheap overnight rate and buy as little electricity as I can at the expensive evening rate. So that's basically how it works. And so there are these time of use tariffs out there now. I think the number of people who have got them is still relatively small, might be 1 million or so. But there are also propositions that you might have come across this. There's propositions around from Octopus, but other people as well around, electric vehicles. So I think, not sure whether the reality is quite this, but there was a proposition from Octopus that said, basically, if you let us control your battery when you don't need the car, then you can charge your electric vehicle quotes for free. I'm not sure it's quite free, by the way, but there are these kind of interesting propositions to try and get this consumer flexibility off the ground. And so I guess, politicians say, how can we reduce the link between gas prices and electricity prices? And so far, we haven't been very successful in terms of macro changes to the energy system. But at an individual consumer level, if I'm simplifying here, but I mean, if you have a battery and you use it in the way I've just described, you are weakening the link between gas and electricity, because you're buying more of your electricity at cheap overnight prices when the vast majority of our generation is coming from nuclear and renewables. So I'm slightly facetious, but when people say how to break the link between gas and electricity prices, I say part of the answer is the battery. Yeah, these are somebody else's projections. So they're not intended as gospel, but they're giving a sort of idea of the trend. What this is trying to show in this chart is what is setting the electricity price, the wholesale electricity price. In how many hours is it set by gas, and in how many hours is it set by other things? And so I'm not quite sure that the 2026 chart is accurate here. But look, if you but then if you look at the trend, just look at the blue bars at the bottom, you can see that the projection is over time will reduce as we get more and more renewables, we get more and more batteries, as we maybe build new nuclear power stations and so on, that we're going to reduce the influence of gas prices on the electricity prices. And everybody will say amen and not too soon. I guess if there is a proviso with this one, it's actually by 2030 there's not a massive reduction. The biggest reduction in reliance on gas comes, according to this projection anyway, between 2030 and 2040. And 2040 feels like quite a long time to wait, doesn't it? Certainly in my lifetime, 2040 still seems quite a long way away. So, clearly renewables are going to continue to grow. Gas generation is going to continue to shrink. But in those hours when we need gas generation, gas will continue to drive the wholesale electricity price. So this is a journey which is going to take place over quite a long period of time. That's what these figures are telling us. Okay, so the last bit says, well, 2040 seems quite a long time to wait, doesn't it? So, what can we do in the meantime, if we can afford it? What can we do to reduce our own, as consumers, our own dependence on gas and our vulnerability to gas price spikes like the stuff we've seen during the Iran war? Uh, uh, one thing I don't know how many of you got solar panels already, but one thing I think that's been in the media a lot is a massive increase in household interest in solar panels. Those who haven't got it already, I'm not sure that the President of the United States realized that this will be one of the consequences of his actions. But in any case, it has led many households to think of putting solar panels where they can. And I think as Rosie said, I'm part of a group that gets involved in putting solar panels on the roofs of schools and other community buildings. And in most cases, the community can make a quite a substantial cost saving by moving over to solar rather than grid electricity. So we talked about batteries a little bit. I mean, I saw a presentation the other day just saying how much the cost of batteries has already come down and how much it's expected to come down in the next 10 or 15 years. So in this case, technology is on our side. It's driving costs down quite dramatically, and has done for solar panels as well. Keep hearing, don't we, that plug and play batteries, smaller ones, are now available in high street retailers. I came across a firm the other day that's offering a household level sort of small plug-in battery. So I think access to the batteries is not really the issue. I think the challenge for many people is to know what to do with the battery when you have it. And there feels to me as if there needs to be quite a bit more hand holding. I'm a bit of an energy geek, as Rosie says. I've got these horrible number of decades in the energy industry behind me, so I've got some idea what I want to do with the battery. But most people who don't follow these things day in day out, what would they do? How would they know what to do? I think is a challenge. Just in passing, what I see in the non-domestic market, let's say for businesses, but also schools, hospitals, and so on, there are people now offering storage as a service. There is commercial firms saying, yeah, okay, we'll just pay for this. Please host this battery on your site, and we'll just give you a bunch of money in return for the opportunity to optimize that battery sitting on your site. So those propositions exist. I think they'll be more and more common, and I can't be 100% sure about this, but I think it's only a matter of time before people start trying to make similar offers to residential consumers. If people like Octopus can give us a very simple, easy to understand and compelling proposition around EVs, it feels like it should be possible to do the same with batteries. So I mentioned EVs now, so that takes me on to my third point. Obviously, people who have their own driveways can park at home and charge at home. They've got the advantage when it comes to taking up electric vehicles. Unfortunately, I'm not quite in that fortunate position. But I think that people who have got EVs, there will be more and more interesting offers from energy suppliers who effectively say, we'll give you a bunch of money if you allow us to use your car battery when you're not needing the car. So I think that is going to become more and more common as we go forward. So not everybody obviously understand there's a big problem with energy debt, less vulnerable, disadvantaged households and so on. But for the people who can afford to do these things, there is some action I think we could all take to reduce our personal exposure to gas-fired generation. And if we do these things, we'll also kind of help the system, and then the system won't need as much gas-fired generation as we have right now. So it feels like a kind of a virtuous circle. And maybe that's a slightly more optimistic message to leave you with as we move into Q&A. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you indeed. And hopefully that has sparked a good number of questions.
Do you want me to stop sharing? Shall I take this down?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind, we'll come back to it if there's a specific questions. So One that comes straight off from Eddie is we have a large battery which we charge overnight. Paul, how long do you think it will be before the overnight price and the day price equalize? And he wants to know, will he get return on his investment in time?
Yes. So I don't have, well, we're in the same, it sounds like we're in the same camp. I don't have too many fears on that score. Um, so it sounds like you're already doing the right thing. So I've got a few solar panels, probably not enough on my house. So what I do is fill the battery from overnight electricity, then empty it again in the morning, and then I fill it at least in summer. Try to fill it up again in the early afternoon when solar generation is at its peak, and then try and force the battery to empty again during the evening. So I reduce my exposure to the kind of peak evening electricity prices. So I think that's a kind of, well, at least feels a fairly sensible strategy. So the fundamental point is right, is that if we had huge amounts of storage on the system, then it would. I don't think it would flatten the price across the day, but I mean it would reduce the differential between the overnight and the evening peak. But I think that's a fairly gradual process. We do have, I don't know if you've seen the figures, we've got any amount of battery storage projects wanting to come forward. The biggest constraint they face is getting a connection to the grid. And for the time being, that's probably throttling back the number of projects that go ahead. So my personal sense is that I'm not sure whether we'll ever flatten the price curve across the day, but I think it will be it'd be a pretty long process. I think it will happen. You're right. But I think the payback on battery storage feels sufficiently short that you wouldn't have to worry. I mean, I sometimes you hear a bit of salesman patter on this, don't you? People tell you that, oh, the battery will pay for itself in 3 or 4 years. I'm not quite believe that. But I wouldn't be surprised if it paid for itself in 5, 6, 7 years, and certainly over that period, there might be a diminution of the price differential across the day, but it's not going to be flattened anywhere near that level. So I of course I'm biased because I've just made the same investment, but I wouldn't I wouldn't worry. It doesn't keep me awake at night.
Okay, I'll come back to Eddie's other question later. I've got Alan asked a question. I thought the UK was doing remarkably well in the development of renewable sources of electricity. So I guess Alan's real question is why is it not, if you like, why are we not closer there if we're doing so well?
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, and it is a paradox. So yeah, I think we've now got, we've got more than half of our electricity coming from renewables. I think most of the time, obviously, it goes up and down a little bit. Maybe one of the things to remember is that actually we've got less nuclear on the system now than we had 10 or 15 years ago. So, obviously opinions vary, don't they, about nuclear, but it is low carbon and it does have a variable cost, which is, more or less zero. Um, so, as you probably know, what's happened is the old plant has closed and the new ones have taken so long to build, that they still haven't come, Hinkley Point still hasn't come onto the system after all these years. So new nuclear is running late, and because of that, I think we're more dependent on gas than we otherwise would have been. So that's one. But then the fundamental paradox is that 29% on an annual average. I think I presented the figures. 29% of our generation, roughly, just under 30%, comes from gas. But we need gas still in about 80, 85% of all the hours. So the thing that, because of the way the market works, is that the thing that drives the electricity price is the marginal source of generation. And so although on annual average we might only be getting 30% from gas, it's actually driving the electricity price in most of the hours in the year, and you've got to so I mean the experience elsewhere suggests that maybe you need renewables, nuclear and other sources of very low marginal cost generation to be maybe up at the 75% level before you really see a significant break in the link between gas and electricity prices. And we're not quite there yet, even despite making good progress. So I think that's what probably frustrates the politicians. On the one hand, they're saying, yeah, we're making great progress. We've decarbonized the power generation sector massively. But on the other hand, they're still seeing, massive impact when gas prices spike, and that's coming through onto everybody's electricity bills as well as their gas bills. So yeah, it's frustrating for everybody, I think, but it is a paradox.
Okay, well, continuing the renewables and what else is there that we could generate with, Philip's asked, where are we with wave energy?
Yeah, I'm not a great expert on wave, but I think not very far is the answer. I mean, there've been various kind of very high profile schemes that why didn't Cardiff Bay happen? I think it was very expensive, but also the environmental and ecological issues were much greater than people had thought. So I mean, if it had gone ahead, the barrage, it would have meant a fundamental change in the nature of Cardiff Bay and in particular sort of some pretty horrible mud flats for quite a bit of the time. So and maybe part of the answer is that something like Cardiff Bay was just over ambitious, and no government was at the time willing to kind of sign off the many billions that were required to develop it. And I suppose if I say I'm not a great expert on wave, but I sort of feel that if it comes back, it'll come back because there are schemes that are more modest in scale, kind of maybe more cost effective and don't have the same kind of consequences for the local environment.
Okay, another one from Philip, but I think a good question people will be asking is, well, if we got on with the fracking that we've talked about for years, would that help us wean ourselves off gas from Russia? And I guess under that is the question that
Yeah,
might be more secure, but is it any going to make any difference
uh,
to the energy
so
price?
we talk about this quite a bit, and of all the topics, it's one that sort of seems to generate more heat than light. And it isn't. I wouldn't even limit it to fracking. I mean, there's the wider political issue about should we allow people to develop new fields in the North Sea or not. This government has been more inclined towards the not. Um, and let's say one way or another we developed more of our own. Well, let's focus on gas because it's more relevant to electricity. Let's suppose we develop more of our own gas. And let's suppose instead of importing 50% of our gas needs, we were importing 40%. What difference would that make? I don't think it would make any difference to price whatsoever. The gas market is, all it's in it. Well, I was going to say it's a global market, but at the very least, it is an international market, and the price in Europe will be what it'll be, and it's primarily set by Europe and the Far East fighting over the need for frozen gas being imported on boats. So my sense is it wouldn't make very much difference to the price. So I don't think it's a price argument. I think the argument is more around, you know, um, obviously, if we had more of our own gas production, it's going to be positive for the balance of payments and positive for jobs. And and then there are different views about this. Some people think that if we allow more drilling in the North Sea, that it'll mean that we'll be more dependent on gas for longer. I don't quite see that myself. But in any case, I think for my money, it's not really a price argument. It's an argument about investment. It's an argument about balance of payments. It's an argument about jobs.
Okay, let's turn a little bit to the flexibility around the batteries. Jane's asked a good question, but how does it work for EV battery capacity to be shared with your presumably provider in some way?
Yeah, I can tell you conceptually. I can't tell you at first hand because I don't, I say I don't have an all electric vehicle. But it's essentially, somebody like it doesn't have to be Octopus, could be any of the companies off this kind of proposition, which is in the jargon, it's called vehicle to grid. You hear people talking about that piece of jargon. But I think if, as I understand it, still it doesn't stop you using the vehicle, but you'll need to say that, I want the battery to be, fully charged by 7 o'clock in the morning so I can drive to Edinburgh or whatever it might be. And I think in principle the way it works is that in times when you say that you're not needing the vehicle, and let's be honest, quite a lot of electric vehicles, I see them in the streets around here sitting there for most of the time. When you're not needing the electricity vehicle, effectively then you allow somebody like Octopus or whoever the provider might be, you allow them basically to empty and refill your battery in those downtimes when you're not needing the vehicle, and they'll basically pay you for that because the grid needs the flexibility. All of the electricity distribution operators are buying a huge amount of flexibility to manage their networks, and that's got a value. So that's how that works. Effectively, somebody like Octopus is intermediating the value, and they'll probably do. I mean, as with battery storage, they'll probably do a couple of things. They'll probably trade some of that against the wholesale market, but they'll also sell that flexibility to the networks. That's basically what's happening with grid scale batteries.
On that point, could I ask a question that I didn't get time to write in the chat? You said a couple of times you're helping when you shift your time of day demand, you're helping the system as well. Could you say a little bit more for people who can't get the idea of why is it helping the system, and maybe mention the cost of providing peak, the capital cost of providing the peak. So if more of the trough is filled, we need less at peak.
Yeah. So I think that maybe a starting point is just to say that the maybe a kind of implicit in what I said already, but the task of managing our electricity system is becoming more and more challenging for the system operator because, it used to be easy. You basically just gave instructions to turn up and down the coal and the gas and all the flexibility you needed came from that. I'm simplifying, but that was roughly the story. Now it is more challenging, and obviously that you can be in a situation where the wind stops blowing or the sun stops shining and suddenly we've got a big hole in our electricity supplies, and then from somewhere or another the system operator needs to go and get new sources of supply or flexibility to basically fill that gap. So it is a combination of using grid scale batteries, but I think increasingly in future will be offering consumers the incentive to use less electricity, particularly at peak times, because it's the peak as I've explained, it's the peak times when we're really most dependent on gas generation and when we actually face the highest wholesale electricity prices. So if I think it was implicit in some of the questions earlier on. If we can be, collectively between the industry and consumers, if we can start to kind of shave those that early evening peak, then we'll reduce the extent of system dependence on more expensive gas-fired generation, which is particularly pushing prices up at that peak time of the day.
Okay. Another question is, could you comment on community energy projects and their viability?
Yes, have you got an hour? But I'll try and do my best. So we do a lot of stuff with schools, especially, and uh, it is I just say it's easier with secondary schools because they've got large electricity consumption and they tend to have more suitable roofs available. So it's there's very rarely a viability issue. So I mean, community energy, roughly speaking, way it works is, and I think we're typical. We basically will finance the project so that the school doesn't pay any money up front, um, and basically we'll own the assets. We take responsibility for maintaining them for a certain period of years until we've paid back our investors, and then when the investors are paid back, we basically will transfer the solar assets for free at zero cost. So that's typically the way it works. And obviously the key to viability is being able to offer a price for solar generation that is materially below the cost of grid electricity. So I don't know. If you've got a secondary school and you're putting 100 kilowatts on the roof, that's probably not an issue. I think where we come across issues is often more with smaller primary schools. There are diseconomies of small scale. So typically, what it, I mean, fortunately, at least in London, that there is grant money available. But typically, if you've got a smaller project, the economics are less promising. Then it needs more grant financing, and we raise money relatively cheaply below commercial rates, but it's the money that we raise is still too expensive for a very small primary school solar project. So there are challenges, and of course there used to be subsidies for solar. There aren't any subsidies anymore, so it has to kind of wash its face. Even though like a lot of community energy groups, we're not for profit, so we're not for profit, but we still need to raise the money and pay back the investors at an agreed rate of interest.